Hi everyone, welcome back for lecture 2 of our class on philanthropy and storytelling for the Indiana University Lilly School of Philanthropy. For this lecture today, we are going to first look at a few elements that make good stories that I'd like you to keep in mind as you're working on your draft of your work of writing. And secondly, we are going to unpack together the richness of Boccaccio and learn a little bit about what he teaches us about the power of stories to cast a vision for the future and reveal new aspects of the human condition. So first, what makes a good story? A few things I'd like you to keep in mind. First, know your audience. Who are you writing to? I'd like you to be as specific as you can, just for yourself. I'd like you to write down even, who are you thinking? Even imagine a real person that represents the broader intended audience that you're trying to write to in a professional and a personal setting, and speak and write specifically to them. Visualizing a person front of mind is useful to that. Second, the struggle, problem, overcoming the problem resolution sequence of events. Like, what is the set up the problem really well? What is the challenge? What is the one? You only get one. It's only 3 to 500 words, or maybe a little bit longer. So define the problem really well, set it up really well, and people love a resolution. This is something we can all empathize with. Just struggling with something. So set up the problem really well, and then unpack how are we going to overcome it. Details. A lot of you at our class this past Wednesday, you made exceptional use of details. You made us feel like we were there with you as you were experiencing the story for yourself, and that's fantastic. So, how did you feel when you heard or when this happened to you? So, if it happened to you, how did you feel when you were there? If you learned about the story secondhand, how did you feel when you heard the story? Try to bring us, the reader or the listener, there with you. Engage all of your senses as much as you can. What did you see? What did you hear, taste, smell? Write down as many of these details, bring them to bear. And when you name an emotion, when someone feels something or you felt something, tell us about it. Where did you feel it in your body? What did you feel? For example, my face was flushed, my heart raced, my heart dropped, my blood ran cold. These are all things that visceral experiences, visceral responses we all have had to emotional stimulus, and they're important to making us feel like we're there with you and to drawing us in and getting us to care about what you're telling us. Stories are all powerful. That's the whole purpose of this class. Personal stories are even more powerful. If you can speak from a personal experience, you're the ultimate authority on that, and there's an instant connection between you and your audience. Last week at the end of class, we talked a little bit about the neuroscience behind storytelling, and just to encourage you to bring your best effort to this project. It is powerful. Time ceases to exist. They've when you're engaged in a story, they've done studies on when a speaker is speaking, and they go from subject matter, reciting facts or data, to telling a story. The brainwaves of their audience members literally go in sync, and they're just absolutely riveted. And we can all probably speak to that experience as well. That we're really engrossed and engaged when a professor or a lecturer or a boss is giving us information, and then all of a sudden there's a story where we're there. So please keep those things in mind. Just some helpful tips to create provocative and high quality storytelling. And I'm very excited to see what you bring to the table. We'll be discussing your drafts as a class on Wednesday. So now let's turn to Boccaccio. So who's Boccaccio? He's one of the three most famous writers in Italian history, along with Dante, who wrote the Inferno, and Petrarch, who was a Renaissance humanist, an early humanist, just an exceptionally learned man. I don't have his biography on the table, but I'm reading a biography of Petrarch right now, and it's incredibly invigorating, and I feel like my best friend died 700 years ago, or 600 years ago. So yes, incredible. And the Decameron is what he's best known for. It's a series of stories. The background is the setting. Florence has been devastated by the plague, by the Black Death, and actually scholars estimate that about up to 2/3 of Florence's population had been killed, devastated. So we are in a pandemic right now. Many of us over the course of the pandemic have probably observed the COVID-19 crisis getting closer and closer to home. What started as, something in China back in January is now something that maybe we've had, or our friends and families have had, or maybe we've even known people who have died from it. So it's definitely something that is touching all of us. Yet it's still not to the scale that it was in Florence. 2/3 of the population just devastated by this. And the context is plague in Florence. The city is devastated. 10 upper class young men and women get together and they decide to escape the plague, escape the Black Death, and to go to a castle for a little holiday, little vacation to get away from the plague. And they play a game. And the game is each person every day tells one story, and they're there for 10 days. So the Decameron is a series of 100 stories. And we're reading the introduction as well as kind of Boccaccio's very famous description of the plague, plus his first story, which is one of his most famous. I'd like to hear from you what you thought was what you thought of Boccaccio's account of the plague. Again, it's one of the most famous accounts of plague and its social and economic and political consequences in history. And but some of my thoughts, I was really struck by, he describes family and friends turning on one another. He talks about how some withdrew into their homes, others drank away their sorrows, kind of living out this ecclesiastical eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow we die. Just kind of this pending remembering, mindfulness of our mortality, and that life is frail and it could end at any moment. So why not drink and have a good time? Others in Boccaccio's account helped people in need. And what's interesting is that his description of the plague really captures the breadth of the human experience. And this is something that we know to be true, that times of crisis, they bring out the best and the worst in us. And we're seeing that in our own moment today as our culture, as our world grapples with this pathogen and the consequences of it. So curious to hear what you guys thought of the first story. So Schiaparello, of course, is visiting France, and he's lived a life of vice. We know that. He falls ill and tells his host that he's on his deathbed, and he tells them he'll give the performance of a lifetime with his confession to the priest, so that he doesn't embarrass his hosts. So he starts his confession, and he clearly has the priest fooled right from the very beginning. He says, things that he didn't do, and he's confessing all these, virtues. And the priest is like, "What are you talking about? These aren't things to be confessing. You're clearly a great guy." But they're all lies. And we get little snippets of the brothers overhearing Schiaparello's confession, and they're laughing to themselves like, "Oh my gosh, this is crazy." And by the end, though, of the confession, even the hosts that are listening to it, and who Schiaparello told he was going to be lying about his confession, they start to be persuaded, and they say to themselves, Is this a lie? Maybe he really is confessing. Maybe he really is having this, deathbed conversion experience. And so the first story ends with that sort of ambiguity, with nobody really knowing. And if you read the last paragraph really closely, I won't read it all here to save time, but please do. We see Boccaccio saying that it's possible the confession was real. He doesn't necessarily think it is, but it's possible that it was real. And Boccaccio says, who are we to know if someone has a conversion at the last minute before they die? All we know, he says, is life here on earth, and that's all we can control. It's how we see people live on earth. And things of the soul, things of the afterlife, that's not something that we know anything about or can speak to here. And it's some might say that actually Boccaccio is responding to Dante, who just a few decades prior had made waves throughout the world with his Inferno, a famous divine comedy, rather, which is all about Dante's progression through the seven circles of hell, it's all about the afterlife, basically. And he's saying, no, we can't, not even worth our time. We cannot deal with that. All we can deal with is what we know, and what we know is life on earth, and let's make the most of it here. Reading this story, we get a taste of the Decameron. There are 99 more stories for you to go enjoy if you feel so inclined. I'm curious to hear in class what you thought of the story and what you thought of that kind of farcical, silly story in comparison to the seriousness of Boccaccio's account of the plague. Boccaccio is giving us an account. It does kind of seem like a jarring juxtaposition. He's talking about death and devastation, then all of a sudden he's talking about, a guy giving a crazy deathbed confession. But I think Boccaccio is telling us of his vision of a post-plague world. His stories, all 100 of them, they explore the breadth of human emotion and the human condition. We see stories of greed, envy, pride, foolishness, love, and suffering and hate. And he offers us one answer to the farce that is human existence. And his answer is that we need a world founded on empathy and compassion. He juxtaposes the suffering that is life, but in his account of the plague, and he juxtaposes that with the farce and the comedy, the ridiculousness that is life, in this first story and in many of his subsequent stories. And he says that if we're going to move past this, we need to laugh, and we need to recenter and refocus on rebuilding a world based on humanity, on empathy, on compassion for a fellow man when they suffer and when they make fools of themselves. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you thought of the Boccaccio reading, especially since as we're in a moment in history right now where we've had 9 months of relative lockdown and certainly a deviance from normalcy as we've grappled with the COVID-19 crisis. And now with a vaccine potentially around the corner, we have a potential return to normalcy. And these are questions that we can be thinking of. What does a post-pandemic world look like? And what does a world made new look like? So a few questions for you that I want to leave you with. As you write, how can you use details and the basic elements of good storytelling to engage your audience? And in class, we'll discuss, as we emerge from a time of pestilence and plague, how can we rebuild a world grounded in a renewed appreciation for our shared humanity, grounded in empathy? And what is the role of storytelling in creating this new world and this new epoch? And please come to class prepared to give a summary of your piece of written work, your argument, and your story, and share it with the class so that we can discuss it and offer some feedback. And thanks again for being here, and looking forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Have a great night.